Growing up on the internet in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I often saw this overwhelming dismay whenever a remake or reboot was announced. A cry out into the digiverse of
How could you have done this?
Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but seriously, back around 2010, you could pick any upcoming reboot or remake from the era and just dunk on it for easy views on your blip.tv video. Nowadays, aside from Disney's live-action repackagings of their animated classics, it feels like remakes and reboots don't even inspire that level of blowback anymore. You'll get a complaint or two, but they've mostly become a droll inevitability of today's nostalgia-obsessed pop culture that most people tend to move on from quickly, especially in the world of video games. Dead Space, Halo, a whole host of Resident Evil do-overs. No matter where on the release schedule you look, you're bound to find some game of yesteryear being remade or remastered to ultimately be resold at a higher MSRP. And if it sounds like there's a hint of cynicism in that statement, then yeah, that'd be a fair assessment. I'll admit that this current trend of gussying up old games to make them seem new has felt undue to me, especially when I would rather see more comprehensive attempts at preserving games as they were, instead of just taking the most popular titles, slapping their name on a new product, and rolling in the moolah. But even with that in mind, I'm not wholly opposed to remakes. In fact, I'd say I'm more conflicted than anything else, since I do think remakes and remasters can have some merit in the right circumstances. On one hand, yes, I'd prefer to see the time, money, and effort poured into these remakes be allocated to new projects instead, and whenever a publisher attempts to use a remake or remaster as a replacement for its original, as seen with Rockstar's GTA Definitive Edition, where they delisted the previous PC versions to force people into buying the remaster, it feels outright disrespectful not only to the work of the original developers, but to the very concept of games being art that should be maintained and passed on to future generations. Whenever a publisher pulls down a game to sell its remake and or remaster, it positions their games as cheap trinkets to be discarded and replaced, an attitude towards art that I, quite frankly, find repulsive. Furthermore, I think even the notion that a remake or remaster can replace the original is wrong-headed, frankly. There are some games where, yes, the remaster or remake can be the best way to experience a title, but even when that's the case, the original still has merit and is worth playing because it provides a level of historical context. When it comes to any form of art, the creative process is also an educational one, and that's especially true when it comes to video games. With many older titles, you can feel the developers learning their craft through game design. Early 3D games trying to wrap their head around camera positioning, console shooters trying to match the smoothness of mouse and keyboard on a controller. All of these little quirks are important to understand the evolution of games as both an art and a technology, but most remakes elect to standardize or modernize those quirks out, losing that important bit of history that both future developers and players can learn from. Not to mention, there's often little details or design elements that get left behind in the remastering process, whether it's Easter eggs or music that had to be removed because of copyright, or perhaps optional control methods that are no longer available, such as the analog face buttons of the PlayStation 2. I'm not saying you should be required to play the original if you plan to play a remaster or remake of a game, but I think you should at least consider it, if for no other reason than to better understand what the folks behind the remaster/remake are electing to change. When you have a better idea of what the new devs felt needed fixing, then it gives you a better idea of how they view the original, and that understanding helps you form an educated opinion about whether or not these changes were truly warranted. Long story short, I just don't think you're getting the full picture without playing the original. On the other hand, I must admit that I've enjoyed quite a few recent video game remakes and remasters because I think they can offer a fresh perspective on a game, allow developers to touch up certain elements that they felt didn't get the love they deserved the first time around, and in rare occasions, they can even go back and add ideas that had to be left out of the original, such as the Crash Insane trilogy adding the cut level Stormy Ascent back in. The Dead Space remake in particular is a perfect example of a remake done right to me. Having played it promptly after finishing the original, I found the contrast between the two made me engage with the story on a deeper level, asking myself if the changes in the remake were warranted and which version of the game better conveyed the sense of visceral dread that the developers and story writers were trying to make the players feel. In fact, I don't outright dismiss remake because I find a level of fun in the comparison. It's intellectually stimulating to see how these stories and ideas can be wildly reinterpreted while still technically being the same on the surface. It's why I tend to prefer remakes that aim for a vastly different approach than the original, such as the recent Final Fantasy VII Re-trilogy. When executed well, I think a remake/remaster can leave me with a deeper appreciation for the original, rather than feeling like a crass attempt to supplant it. All this to say is that there's a unique artistic talent that goes into crafting a remake, not just in deciding what aspects of the original need to be kept and what could do with an update, but more importantly, how to interpret the intentions of the original's development team and ensure those intentions don't get lost in the translation to new hardware and updated technology. To be truthful, so long as the original games remain easily available, I don't mind the occasional remake coming out here or there. I think an original game and its remaster/remake can even complement each other. I just wish they weren't so prevalent in the current AAA industry. They should be more of a spice rather than being the main course. And they also shouldn't become a staple of a series to the point where it feels like remakes are the only idea anyone has for it anymore. And on that note, we wrap up the introductory rambling to bring you Star Fox 64 for the third time in a row. Hop in the R-Wing and let's crank up the noise as Krank critiques Star Fox for Switch 2. Aside from Tetris and Pong, I struggle to think of a game that's had more high-profile remakes than Star Fox 64. Those don't count, Todd, you're just releasing Skyrim again. This 1997 exemplar of arcade-like rail shooting remains many fans' favorite amongst Fox McCloud's outings, though my scaly contrarian tail will always choose 2005's Star Fox Assault as the best entry. After all, does 64 have a cartoonish dog general begging for death so he may avoid becoming part of the techno-organic swarm pillaging the galaxy? I don't think so, buddy boy.
They took me. My body's no longer under my control. No, this is my final request. Destroy this ship. Destroy me!
Theater of the highest caliber right there, my friends. Still, I unfortunately remain in the minority, and 64 is the game that most often comes to mind when people think of Star Fox. As such, Nintendo decided to create a modernized retelling of this seminal space quest for a modern audience, even though they already did that twice. See, before I can even really articulate my opinion on Star Fox for Switch 2, I can't help but ask why it even exists. Even putting aside the fact that the original version of this game is still available on Nintendo Switch via the NSO expansion pass, Nintendo already remade this game twice, once on the 3DS in 2013, and again as Star Fox Zero on the Wii U in 2016. Now, one could argue Zero shouldn't count as a remake due to the added content and slightly altered level designs, but it features the same story, characters, and mission/route structure as Star Fox 64, so I count it as a remake. Walks like a fox, like a fox, etc. In my mind, Zero is just 64 again, with some minor differences and a cramp-inducing control scheme, which makes the decision to release a third remake of 64 just utterly baffling. It's not as if Nintendo has been against porting 3DS and Wii U games to Switch, so part of me has to ask what would have been wrong with simply bringing the 3DS version back and upping the resolution for Switch 2. Hell, even Zero could have been brought to modern hardware if Nintendo was willing to overhaul the control system. It's not as if many people played it, considering it came out at the end of the Wii U's brief, ignominious life, and the Switch could have given that game an actual chance at finding an audience. I just can't wrap my snout around the reasoning any company would go out of their way to remake a game on 3 separate occasions and do so consecutively, no less. The 3DS version was 2011, Zero was 2016, then after a decade of silence on the Star Fox front, except for the Mario Galaxy movie and that odd collaboration with Starlink of all things, Nintendo decided the best way to bring Star Fox back was another retelling of 64? It just utterly boggles the noggin. Well, according to an interview with Miyamoto, this game was meant to be an introductory title, a way for young fans who saw Fox in Smash and the Mario Galaxy movie to be properly swept into the courageous K-Nid's world, and that's fine. I certainly want more people to be into Star Fox so we can get more games more often, but I can't help but feel a wholly new title not only would have achieved that same goal, but it would have done so while feeling far more exciting than just, we've done 64 again. Alright, but my consternation about this new remake's existence aside, how does it actually compare to every other revision of Star Fox 64? Well, let's start with the art style. It's utterly gorgeous, except for one little thing. Just one teensy, almost imperceptible thing. Okay, you get the joke, it's the character designs. There's been some debate over these redesigned characters leaning much more into the animalistic features, and for me, these new characters inch just a bit too close to the uncanny valley. I think it's the eyes. They're too small and they come off beady and cold. So much so that it becomes hard to even understand what emotion the animators are trying to convey in any given scene. So while there are some elements to the characters that I think are a cool addition, such as Falco having digital legs. Yeah, exactly what I said. Digimon legs. Only a little. But even if there are some things I prefer about these redesigns, I just never warmed up to them as a whole. It's not really a mark against the game since I can't say these new designs are outright bad, but they just go against my usual preference. It probably doesn't help that for as bad as Star Fox Zero was, I think that game was practically pitch perfect in terms of its designs for the cast of characters. Their bright color palettes, cartoonish yet detailed designs, and overall aesthetic choices just appeal to my tastes a lot more, so while I get what they were going for, it's not my cup of tea. Still, I can't deny this is probably the best interpretation of what a realistic Star Fox crew could look like. Each cast member remains instantly recognizable while gaining a distinctive new appearance. For some, the changes are relatively minor. Slippy, for example, looks mostly familiar aside from some different skin textures, but Fox himself looks vastly different. His snout is smaller and narrows much more. His legs are a bit more stubby, which makes his body seem almost lopsided, as if he's a quadrupedal animal trying to balance on two legs. Oh, hush you. I find myself so torn because I can't help but acknowledge that these redesigns are perfectly achieving what they set out to do in making believably realistic designs for anthropomorphic animals while still keeping the core personalities that fans have come to expect and even love from these characters. But on a personal level, I just find these freaks way too ugly to tolerate looking at for any extended period of time. Again, I can't count this against the game since this is really mostly an issue of my personal taste, but it gets under my scales nonetheless. For all my whinging about the new character designs though, I can't deny basically everything else looks pitch perfect. The spaceships, the planets, and the other chaos of all-out war breaking out around you as you play. Whenever it's just focused on the vehicles, the game looks shockingly detailed for a Switch 2 game. I especially love how the art directors and animators seemingly went out of their way to make each world you visit feel vast and unending, truly giving this feeling that you're just glimpsing a small portion of this massive alien planet. Even the first few bosses are these towering monstrosities of metal that ride the perfect line between intricate enough that you could see how these machines could function without worrying so much about realism that they fail to take advantage of how wonderfully outlandish sci-fi can be. The organic enemies also tend to be a visual spectacle. The lava golem, Vulcane, pulses with light as molten magma seeps through the cracks along its rocky skin. The giant clam boss of Aqua, Bakun, is bathed in shadow, barely giving you a look at the creature and quite genuinely hitting upon my phasmophobia. It's rare that a game manages to unnerve me. Even most horror games don't really scare me, but this interpretation of Aqua's genuinely gave me a chill that permeates to my very core. So the visuals are a very weird contrast to me. It's almost objectively great looking in so many aspects, a true showcase of what the Switch 2's hardware can accomplish, but just that one unshakable issue of the character designs that hinders the look for me. I can't call it bad, and honestly, this art style does work for this particular title because we focus so little on the anthropomorphic characters and gameplay, but whenever we hit a cutscene, it's just, get away, you, please don't focus on his face like that. While I appreciate the willingness on the behalf of the devs to stretch their creative wings and go for such radically new takes on long-standing Nintendo staples like Fox and Falco, I cross my scales that this is a one-time experiment, and the next title, if there is one, goes back to something closer to Star Fox Zero or even Smash Ultimate's interpretations of the Star Fox cast. Play. On the surface, there's not much here actually different about this particular iteration of Star Fox 64. It's a rail shooter where you fly through a level, shooting down enemies, all while trying to keep an eye out for power-ups in the form of laser upgrades, smart bombs, and golden rings to increase your health. Each playthrough is a campaign where you go through a variety of levels to reach Venom, home of the sinister Simeon Andros. Along the way, the choices you make in each level will determine not only how that particular stage plays out. For example, follow Falco through this little obstacle course here, and you'll get a completely different first boss than if you had just ignored him. It's all pretty familiar if you've played Star Fox 64 before, even down to the bosses, levels, and routes you can take to get to Andros. There's not much here in the actual campaigns to shake up the experience if you're a veteran of the Corneria Wars. No, the new stuff comes in through the challenge mode, a mode where you can replay every level with special criteria like not letting any of your squad get shot down or taking out a certain enemy first. It's nothing mind-blowing, it's not like these challenges completely change the way you interact with these levels, but they're a fun bonus for anyone familiar with the original game. And conquering some of these challenges, along with completing some of the levels in the main campaigns, will unlock new folders in the Holo Viewer, a little in-game file system that gives not only bios for every major character and vehicle, but throws in a little holographic model to rotate and examine. This may not be a big deal to most people, but I always love it whenever a game decides to include this. Letting you get a closer look at the models and see all the minutia that goes into them is something I've appreciated ever since I first played Brawl as a kid and discovered the trophies. Plus, if this really is meant to be a new jumping on point, then I feel like a basic rundown of who everyone is, what's going on in the setting, and how all the various ships and weapons actually work might be needed, so that you're not just dumping people into this world with little explanation. Now granted, Star Fox isn't Dune or anything, it's not particularly hard to figure out, so one could argue as to whether or not the Hollow Viewer is even necessary, but put yourself in the shoes of someone who's never played any of these games, someone who only knows Fox, Falco, and Wolf as the weird furries from Smash Bros. Having all these planets and characters just thrown out there with little explanation, Corneria, Lilat System, Andros, etc., it might seem a tad confusing at first, so having something that lets you brush up on the history and current state of this world might help alleviate that confusion a bit. In fact, the game overall does a lot to flesh out these events into a proper story, which brings me to story is absolutely where this newest version of 64 shines. While the basic beats are the same as every other version, Andros killed Fox's dad, who's strangely just named James. I don't know, in a world where people are named Cat, Fox, Andros, James just feels oddly mundane to the point of unintentional humor. Same with characters like Leon and Andrew, but let me not get off topic. Andros wants to take over the Lilat system, and General Pepper of the Cornerian army hires Star Fox to deal with him. What makes this particular telling of the story the best is, well, the game actually tells it. Novel, I know. With the original being on the N64 and having all the memory of a bell punch calculator, there wasn't really any way for that game to add cutscenes, and while the 3DS version and Zero could have added extra story, they elected not to for the most part. I mean, the advertising for Star Fox Zero elaborated more on the story than the game itself. The Switch 2 version, however, has added completely new cutscenes before and after every level, providing better context and, more importantly, giving the player a better insight into these characters than what we've had before. In fact, there's even a new introductory cutscene that lets us see the fate of James McCloud and the moment Pigma betrayed Star Fox, something that until this point has only ever been described through text crawls and manuals. It's such a fundamental moment in this game's story that it's genuinely kind of insano to me that it's never been properly portrayed in any of the previous versions. Now, all this new work would be for naught if the writing and animation work weren't actually good, but narrative designer Nick... Oh dear, I feel like no matter how I try to pronounce this, I'm going to be completely off the mark. Eliopis? I'm so sorry. And narrative designer Heath Gartner did an excellent job at defining these characters in a way that makes them feel more nuanced than any previous portrayal we've seen before. Fox feels much more morally gray, overriding Peppy's advice, getting a tad more snippy with his team, consistently reminding General Pepper that he's doing this mission only because Star Fox is getting a fat check from the Cornerian government once Andros is in the ground. The dialogue even leans into his rivalry with Falco a little more than usual. It really paints a portrait of an impetuous, almost self-centered young man who wants to do good in the galaxy, so long as he and his team get some kind of reward afterwards. Just like with the radical new designs, it genuinely surprises me that Nintendo even let such a take on one of their classic characters come out like this. Keep in mind, this is the same company that wouldn't let Retro Studios have Samus hunt bounties in the Prime games even though she's a bounty hunter. I'm kinda curious how some of Fox's characterization got through in the end. If I had any major complaint with the story, it mostly comes down to the characters around Fox not getting enough focus for my taste. Don't get me wrong, everyone in the cast is charming, but I just find myself wanting more out of Slippy, Falco, and especially Peppy. Eric Braw's voice delivery is so genuinely warm. He sells the idea of Peppy being Fox's surrogate father, and I wish we had gotten more of him. Plus, I swear he sounds like an exact copy of Frank Welker's Fred. Seriously, I thought it was Frank Welker until I saw the credits. Maybe see him raising and training Fox after James's death, or give some more dialogue with Pigma to sell the betrayal and pain Peppy feels at his own teammate backstabbing him like that. There's a little dialogue between them during the Star Wolf boss fight, but I just feel there's such a rich potential for storytelling in Peppy's life that goes unexplored throughout the series, and if they wanted to add some extra content, then maybe an unlockable campaign centered around Peppy, James, and Pigma could have been added. I understand that I'm asking for a bit much, but it could be short, kind of like a DLC expansion except packed into the main game. As it is, it's the Fox McCloud show, and that's fine, that's how the original was, but I can't help thinking that if you're gonna do a complete remake from the ground up with new additions to the story, why not go even further and expand on the rest of the crew? See a little more of what's going through Slippy, Falco's, and Peppy's heads during all this. Is that asking for a lot? Maybe, but if you're really committed to retelling the story yet again, then go all out. Do everything in your power to make this the definitive version of this story, the one that people will come back to time and time again. Star Fox for Switch 2 is undeniably the best remake of Star Fox 64. It hits all my metrics for what makes a good remake, but it's still the third remake of Star Fox 64 in a row, and that's kind of exasperating to me as a longtime fan. Fighting the same bosses, going through the same routes, even a shiny graphical update and some extra cutscenes can't alleviate the feeling of going through the motions with this game. I just can't help but yearn for something different from this series because I love this world and its characters, all the sleek vehicles and abhorrent alien anomalies zooming through the galaxy. I want to see Nintendo move on from 64 and try something new again. It's been 2 decades since the story last moved forward with Star Fox Command, and while that game was a stumble, I'd prefer to see Star Fox pick itself back up and forge ahead instead of just wallowing in the past every entry. But when I look beyond my own desires and judge this game more empirically, I have to admit that this is a really excellent entry point for the series. At only $50 with the extra challenges to get you replaying these stages until you've practically perfected them, along with the Holo Viewer being such a great way to catch up on the basics of this universe and the characters that inhabit it, this game is probably going to have newcomers hooked. Meanwhile, longtime fans might not get as much out of it, especially if you played any other version of 64 beforehand. While there is some new content to sink your fangs into, it's not quite enough to make these familiar routes feel new again. If you're an old fan curious about the game, then I'd say wait for the blue moon when Nintendo actually puts their games on sale. Or heck, take advantage of physical games while they still exist and grab a used copy for cheap if you can. So this is an awkward place I find myself. Star Fox for Switch 2 isn't a game I can say is bad, or even one that I disliked on the basis of its gameplay or, for the most part, presentation, but more one that's very existence just disappoints. Again, that's entirely unfair though, and I understand this game is more of an on-ramp for new people more than anything else. And if that's the needed stepping stone to rebuilding an audience for this series so that someone at Nintendo can justify putting out new, consistent entries that evolve the gameplay and advance the story, then so be it. Hopefully this does well enough that it won't be too long before everyone's favorite spacefaring Volpine and his crew are back in a new adventure that'll not only keep the new fans this game brings, but please long-time fans like this croc here. It's high time we take to the skies once again, barrel rolling and smart bombing through any danger in the way. So let me know in the comments, what did you think? Are you a newcomer, and if so, did this game get you interested in the rest of the series? Are you a longtime fan who found this remake a little more fulfilling than I did? What would you like to see this series try next? Honestly, as bad as Command was, I do kind of want to pick up after the Marcus ending of that game and see Fox as a father, training his son to take over the Star Fox team and bonding with him in a way that he never could with his own dad because, you know, dead. I think a passing the torch story would be a perfect direction for the series going forward, but let me know what you think. Thank you all so much for the support and patience. Life has been a mess for me, but I'm glad you're all here to help me through it. And always remember to crank up the noise.